All right, in this episode, we talk about internal, external rotation velocity
and the future of Matt Harvey's career.
All right, Brent Porcio, Stephen Godani here at the @TopVelocity hashtag Pitch and Tips show, where you go to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, @TopVelocity hashtag Pitch and Tips. Ask your question, we answer it on the show. We're getting up there with our episodes. We are looking at episode 100 to open up to baseball tips. So right now, if you're out there and you have questions not specific to pitching, to baseball, because we do have our 2X programs, please ask those questions as well, because we have 2X programs that deal with throwing velocity for position players, pop time program for catchers. We have yet to go into hitting. One day, we'll probably go into hitting. Our 2X programs, though, the strength approach, the power approach, would definitely be significant to helping bat speed, power, you know. So if you have any questions,
dash times too.
Yeah, we do 60s as well. So if you have any questions on baseball in general, you want to answer the show, do that. We'll start episode 100. We're going to start opening it up to baseball tips. So what's the question for today?
Grant Henry asks, is there any correlation between shoulder internal rotation, external rotation, range of motion, and velocity?
Okay, good question. Shoulder range of motion, internal, external, doesn't, I think there is going to be a study that correlates, you know, guys who threw harder had a little bit more range of motion. I believe there might be a study out there that correlates that, but really if you look at most of them, the range of motion more correlates to injury. For example, there's several studies that shows guys that have, you know, less internal rotation than average typically are more prone to injury. Guys that have less external rotation more prone to even UCL injury. Typically the internal is prone to UCL or shoulder injury, the external deficits are prone to UCL injury. Here's my theory on that, and it's not really that conclusive except for GERD, which is glenohumeral rotation deficit. No, completely wrong. I don't know where my head is. GERD, G-E-R-D. Look it up. It basically says you have a deficit in your range of motion. Typically they compare it to the other arm. We do, though, gain external rotation when we throw and we lose internal. You just don't want to lose more internal than you gain external, and you definitely don't want to have less of a range of your other arm when you look at the total range. It will be in a different range, you just don't have less of a range. That can lead to, or just be a sign of shoulder injury. Now, the internal deficits can be the problem because if you look at how the arm internally rotates, if my trunk is forward, I hit pitch release, I do need about a good, if this is 0, I need a good, 60 degrees to decelerate that arm. I mean, anything past here, your arm's gonna come across your face. You don't really need more range than that. So I'd say 50 to 60 would be adequate on internal rotation. Anything less than that, like 30 degrees, you're gonna hit 30 degrees, and if that's the end of your range, your scaps are gonna wanna fly out, and that causes all the labrum tears. That's why that typically leads to shoulder injury. External rotation, here's the theory, my theory on external rotation. I've seen a lot, not all of them, but a lot of UCL guys have poor or limited external rotation. For example, if my trunk's forward and my arm wants to fully load, but it hits into range right here, well, that means this joint is maxed. Well, then the stress is gonna go somewhere else, and right now it's gonna go into that elbow. And that elbow, if it's weak, it's gonna have an overload of torque. So if we can get the arm to fully load, fully externally rotate, the arm doesn't wanna pull behind the back, it just wants to lay down because the forces are going this way. So if it can fully lay down and has still even some room where it's just tightening off, it's almost perfection of where we need to be, that arm is going to be evenly distributing the torques. So I know it's crazy. And then the question is, do we go out and how do we stretch all this? I really believe it needs to be stretched, really strengthened more than stretched. I'm not big on stretching these rotator cuff muscles. I'm big on just strengthening and throwing and building their range of motion through function, right? That's my approach. But if you want to look at the shoulder internal and external rotation and it links to velocity, it more links in how much torque it can handle, obviously. So there's studies that say more peak torque in external rotation typically correlates to throwing velocity. More peak torque in internal rotation correlates to throwing velocity. So if you're really going to say what correlates to throwing velocity, it's the ability, how much torque you can handle in internal and external rotation, not how much range of motion you can create. That's going to be more the health of the arm. Anything you want to add to that?
Doesn't the external, internal high velocity pitchers go from external to internal faster than low velocity pitchers though?
Right.
Like into pronation?
Right. High velocity pitchers, they move in internal rotation quicker, and they typically get more internal rotation into pitch release. So a low velocity guy, he's still trying to get into internal rotation and pitch release. A high velocity guy, he's already into internal rotation and going into pronation. That just means his arm's moving faster. I mean, that's kind of a duh moment, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's key. Also too, typically the UCLs tear during the internal rotation moment. The moment it wants to go forward, that's when the torque hits the UCL, and that's usually when they tear. So, you know, that's where you gotta be careful. Peak torque in the external rotators is important to be able to load your gun, but if it goes to unload and that torque, you know, hits the elbow, hits the UCL in the elbow, and it can't handle that, that's where we have to have really good range of motion, not only a strong rotator cuff to handle the torques, but a strong elbow, forearm, bis and tris to handle the torque here, because the torque will find the weakest link. If this isn't the weakest link, it'll go here. That's why if you ever had arm problems, you'll have arm problems here, and then all of a sudden you'll get this stronger, right? Maybe you take some time off and you strengthen it, and then all of a sudden you start having arm problems here, and it like goes back and forth. It's like you're chasing the arm problem. It's because it's going to the weakest link. It's like, oh, well, you strengthen this up, now this is the weakest link. Well, then you strengthen us up, and that's the weakest link. Mm-hmm. And so you can keep them both strong. Now, how do we strengthen that? It's not just here and here, it's total body, because the whole body can contribute to the loads in the arm, and that's what's really gonna help.
But also like guys with like Matt Harvey, like he doesn't get great external rotation, and then you can like even Tim Lincecum, when he was throwing really hard, he didn't really have like awesome external rotation. So how much does that benefit towards the velocity if they're not getting like?
No,
some
I don't
people are
think
really concerned about not getting a lot of external rotation.
Right. I mean, you can't. That's why not saying range of motion means velocities, because you look at. I mean, Tim Lincecum, I think he's decent,
but it wasn't like crazy. It wasn't like Billy Wagner.
But Matt Harvey's a good example. Really poor external rotation.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think it's gotten better since his UCL surgery. I don't know. I'd like to measure it. It looks better. Which typically, when you have a torn UCL or weakened UCL, you lose range of motion in your external rotators. But yeah, I mean, the point is Matt Harvey, can he throw hard? Yes, yeah. Matt Harvey can throw hard. You don't need all this external rotation range of motion. It would help. It really came down to peak torque. Matt Harvey, right here could generate the peak torque of 100 miles an hour. Does that mean he could have generated it at 120 back here? No, I just think it'd be more healthier for his arm, because he's having to generate speeds from here to there as opposed from all the way here to there. Gives him more time, so he doesn't have to go as fast. Yeah, potentially he probably could throw harder. I don't know how much harder that would mean. What I'm saying is Matt Harvey, just because he doesn't have full external rotation doesn't mean he can't throw hard, because we know he does. It has to do with how much torque's coming out of that position, but it would be healthier for him if he had more external rotation, I believe. And I think that's the issue with Matt Harvey. If he does have another UCL tear, and like I said, I got to see where his external rotation is. I think it's gotten better. But if his external rotation is still not full, that's the problem, is he doesn't have good range of motion in his arm, and that's going to be more the link to injury.
Breaking the kinetic chain just right there, right?
Yeah, it's just like, I don't know, it's hard to relate it to something else. I mean, it's like, think of just like a rubber band. If I have a little stocky rubber band and I can only pull it back so far, and I got to really make it tightly wound because the few inches I pull it back, I've got to get as much power out of it as opposed to something that I can stretch, gives it more time, more, it doesn't have to generate as much energy because it has more time to generate forces. It's going to be that rubber band's going to outlast that little thick one. That one's just going to wear out and burn out quicker. And that's really what it just comes down to. I mean, Matt Harvey is he going to burn out quicker than, someone like John Lester? I mean, I think John Lester, you look at the power. I mean, this is just hearsay. You got to measure this stuff, but you look at the power that Harvey puts out of his body. Of course, Harvey throws a lot harder and Lester's a lot older, but two big guys. One guy's had a really long career, and I've always seen Lester as a very efficient, low-effort guy that gets a lot out of his body, and that's why he's still playing so long. And I think that's what you see with baseball is guys that play well into their careers, 15-year careers. It's because they could take a similar size to everyone else and get the same ability out of it with less effort and less wear and tear. That's obviously why they go so long. So point is, someone like that has limited external rotation and they're throwing as hard as Matt Harvey concerns me that he's having to put more wear and tear on his body. And that's probably why he makes it an issue. That's probably why Andrews, wanted to limit to him, and the whole issues he had this year about shutting himself down. He's probably concerned about that. He probably doesn't, project a lot of longevity in his body.
Especially first year back from Tommy John too. Like,
right, first year back's really a scary year, I think, for most of these guys because, it's hard even in a year to feel recovered from that kind of a surgery.
They're talking about moving the recovery time back from the 12 months to 16 months to even 20 months or something.
Yeah, and that scares Major League Baseball because giving the guys that much recovery time means that much time away from playing the game at that level, and that concerns them. That'll take them that much longer to get in. And at that time, you have more guys coming through the system, so I think it's really hard on these guys to have to go through that. Good question. I know that kind of took us everywhere, but it really brings up a good topic, a good understanding of the arm and how we have to take care of it and how we get performance out of it without ruining it. All right, so if you have a question, go to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, @TopVelocity, #PitchTips. Ask your question, we answer it on the show.